If you've ever played with a scratch golfer, you might have noticed that they still manage to score well even when their swing isn't cooperating. And their bad shots don't actually turn out to be that bad.
He was far from 100%. That's what great players and some of the best do, is they find a way to get it around and find a way to be in contention.
The secret is that really good golfers know how to tilt the odds in their favor. And once you understand this mindset, your scores and your handicap will drop real fast. So in this video, we'll talk about 7 scratch secrets that will make a huge difference to your scores, and I'll show you how to put them into play in your very next round. Hey, I'm Manu, welcome to the channel, and to the whiteboard of wonderful wisdom, on which we're gonna talk about our 7 scratch golf IQ points, and how to put them into play. But before we get into it, one quick caveat. Now at times, you might think that some of the stuff I'm saying is too advanced for you. It's not. Now for most of us, we're never gonna be able to keep up with those childhood phenoms who learned how to swing a club before they could walk. Like I was at the range the other day, and this kid had a GC quad and a TrackMan, and he was maybe like 7 years old. Now I'm over here trying to figure out how far a beat up range ball goes versus an almost new range ball, right? So different levels, but the one thing that is level ground is the golf IQ we have. You know, I'd love to see this kid trying to make an Excel model that probably nobody will see. But still, my main point here is golf IQ levels the playing field, and it helps you get really good really fast. I'm living proof, I've done it. So with that, let's get right in to number 7. So here we are at number 7, which is assessing the lie. Now for most of us, we think we know a lot about this because we think about the lie, right? What kind of grass is the ball sitting in, or maybe something other than grass. But the fairway or the rough is one important part. Scratch golfers actually think about more than just that. So the second component, which is an important one, is whether the ground is uphill or downhill, because it's going to affect the way that you contact the ball. So for example, if you're standing on a downward slope, you need to level your body. There's a lot of information out there. I'm not going to explain it all. You need to level your body, but the club is more likely to hit the ground farther back in your stance. So you need to adjust your ball position. Same thing with uphill, right? The other way around. Also, the ball's gonna take off in a different way. And the third component of lies that scratch golfers think about is whether the ball is above or below the feet. And the reason this matters is because when the ball is above your feet, you're more likely to make a swing pulling the ball more to the left. If it's below your feet, it's the other way because of the way the club will come down and the ball's below. Also, you kind of need to stay in your stance, so there's more stuff that's required. But all of that is going to mean the ball's likely to go to the right. Now, you've probably heard this before, but how often do you assess this when you get over any ball? And so the reason for all of these, they all have one big impact, which is they influence the contact on the ball, because that's what matters, right? The ball doesn't care how kind of a loopy swing you have. The ball really only cares about the speed and the direction that it gets hit with the club at. So how to put this into practice? So with lies, there's 2 questions I like to ask. The first one is, can I get a club on the ball cleanly? And so this is where the whole fairway rough sand thing comes into play. If you're in the rough, you're not going to get a club on the ball fully cleanly because grass is going to get in the way. So what's going to happen then is it's going to affect your landing spot. So this all influences where you want the ball to land so that it rolls to wherever the target is. For example, so say you're hitting out of the fairway, you're gonna get a lot of spin on the ball. You might not need to leave as much space for the ball to roll out versus when you're hitting from the rough where you're gonna get a lot more rollout. The second question is, with a neutral swing, where is the club going to impact the ground? So this is what we just talked about in terms of ball above or below your feet or, you know, uphill, downhill, all that stuff, because this is gonna determine what you need to do to change your stance. So when you put these 2 together and you think about where the landing spot is and how your stance needs to change, you're in a much better position to actually hit a good shot, a better shot that takes into account the nuances of what's happening on the ground and gets you landing in a better spot overall. And I know thinking about lies can seem like it's too basic. You know, we want to think about, oh, kind of swing, you know, I'm trying to I know it can seem really basic, but if you watch even the pros, all of them will talk about this. A really good video series to watch is My Game by Tiger Woods. It's from Golf Digest. I think most of it's on YouTube now. But you'll notice on every single shot, he talks about, the first thing he talks about is, what does the lie look like?
I feel it's just slightly below my feet. I'm gonna make the slight adjustment of putting the ball slightly further back, maybe about half a ball, quarter of a ball further back in my stance.
It is so important. That's why it's number 1/7 on our list. And with that, here we are at number 6, which is really about understanding green contours, but not just for putting, actually for approach shots. And this is something I've heard from a few people where they're like, no, I'm really good at reading greens, so I don't need a green map or whatever. Yeah, you probably don't for reading the greens, but you should, especially if you're playing an important round or you're playing a tournament at some place, or maybe you just like want to know for your home course it's really valuable to understand the green contours for where the ball needs to land. And so for me, for example, I use the Gin app. This is like the iPad version, so you can see it a little bit bigger, but you can see it there. You can also get actual like yardage books that show you the green contours and stuff. Or you can just do some research beforehand. You know, maybe if it's a course you play all the time, you can draw little arrows yourself. The reason green contours is really important is because one thing that's really hard to fight is physics. So if the ball is gonna land on a flat part of the ground, great, it's probably gonna do normal things. But if it lands on any kind of a slope, the odds of it moving in the direction of that slope are really quite high, like 100%. So for example, with this, the 5th hole at the Presidio, it's a very interesting hole because the whole green, as you can see, slopes hard back to front, kind of back left or back right to front left. Say you land it a little bit farther than where you expected and you need to putt downhill, it's probably gonna be a really sketchy putt moving very quickly downhill. And it's a bigger chance of a 3-putt. Now, one of the objections I get from people are, I'm not accurate enough to actually think about like green contours. Yeah, maybe. None of us are actually, to be honest, because you've got the shot dispersion, there's always gonna be left, right, it's always gonna be a miss. But if you don't take into account at all, the odds of you actually having a better outcome are much lower. So yes, your swing will get better over time and you'll get to the point where you have tighter shot dispersion. But until then, you can still apply this stuff, and the more you apply it now, the quicker it'll be for you to apply it in the future, and your scores will get better. And trust me, it actually does work. It will make your scores better immediately. So in terms of putting into play, it's a very simple question that you can ask, which is, what is the ball going to do after it lands? And there's 3 parts to this, right? So the first is, how firm is the green? The second is, what's the slope it's gonna land on or likely to land on, or you want it to land on, even if you're not actually gonna hit that exact slope. And the third is, what kind of spin is it coming with? And this is something we just talked about from the lies section previously, where if you're hitting off the fairway and there's gonna be a decent amount of spin, yeah, okay, that comes into play when you're thinking about where it's gonna land and end up. And vice versa, if you're coming out of the rough and there's not gonna be much spin, then something to think about in terms of what it's gonna do after it lands. This part here, green firmness, this is an important one too. I highly recommend one really simple thing you can do is, as you start playing the round, just notice, are the greens receptive or are they hard, like fairly firm? Kind of, how are they treating the ball once it lands, right? From different shots in the first 2 or 3 holes, and then use that to figure out what's happening for the rest of the round. The slope piece is something we discussed. You can make your own green book. You can at least have an idea in your head. You probably know this for your home course already, or you can always get a yardage book, or personally, I prefer the Gin app. It's a really good app, very easy to use, and not too expensive. And here we are at number 5, which is hit the simplest, what I call 80% shot possible in most situations. And so a good simple way to think about this is, you know, a lot of times I see people who are kind of, you know, in the 5 to 10 handicap range, thinking about hitting like baby draws and baby fades and stuff like that. If that is something that you enjoy doing, you should absolutely 100% do it. Your enjoyment comes first, everything else comes second. However, if you really enjoy having a lower handicap, I would suggest reducing the variability in the types of shots you're trying to hit, because your standard stock shot, whatever it is gonna have some variability anyway. So the more variability you start adding in terms of like, okay, this time I'm gonna try to like a little baby cut with this 120-yard gap wedge or whatever, instead of just hitting the gap wedge straight in that direction, you're probably gonna end up losing shots because it's not going to go the way that you expect. Maybe you left the face too open, maybe your stance was too closed, other things like that will happen. And actually a really good, a simple example of this that I am very guilty of all the time, not anymore, because since I've learned, is so let's suppose you're trying to hit like a simple chip to a flag and you're smart. You were like, you know, your ball's over here, you're trying to hit a chip to the thing. Now in the past, I would try to hit a high shot that landed here and then spun and got, you know, ideally to the hole, you know, I'd say, oh, this is the right answer, etc. I'm hitting a 60-degree wedge. The odds of me hitting that shot perfectly, not 80%, probably in like the 50% range, because sometimes I'm gonna land it too short, it's gonna end up here. Sometimes I'm gonna land it too long, and it's gonna end up over here. Not a great shot. But a much simpler shot that I can pull off 80% of the time or better is if I use, let's say, a 56-degree wedge. I land it here and let it roll all the way up to the hole, or close enough, right? I can get into this circle way more frequently with a 56-degree wedge than I can with a 60-degree wedge. And this means I have more birdie looks or par looks or whatever else it might be. So really simple concept around like hit the 80% shot. And there's a reason I say 80%. You notice I didn't say 100%. Now in some situations, let's suppose you're going down this stretch, you're about to win the US Open, hit the 100% shot. That is smart, you should do that. But if you're not doing that, and you're only hitting 100% shots, especially as like an amateur for most of us in all of your scenarios, you're probably leaving shots on the table because you're not being aggressive enough. And so what you want is, this is a strong belief of mine, is you want like a happy medium between shots you can generally hit most of the time and pushing yourself a little bit to try to get a little bit closer. And I'm guessing you already figured out what the question is that we're gonna ask for this one, which is, what is a shot that I can pull off 80% of the time? So as often as possible, this is what we should be doing. If necessary, drop to like the 90, 100%. If you're just trying to have a good time, go for the 10% shots, totally. We're here to have fun, that's number one. But if you're trying to get your handicap down, do other things, this is what's gonna make sure. And yes, it can feel like boring golf at times, but personally, I get very excited after the round when I see the under par scores on my scorecard. So yeah, real benefits. And here we are at number 4, which is about scrambling and specifically about short siding. Now, one thing you might notice about scratch golfers and really good golfers, pros on the tour, is their scrambling is really good. They tend to get up and down really frequently. But one thing we don't tend to track is where are they usually at to be able to get up and down so frequently, right? And one of those key points that to consider here, and what separates really good golfers from the rest, is the idea and understanding of being short-sighted. Now, you might have heard about this before from Scott Fossey. He talks a lot about it with Decade Golf. Most good golfers will talk about or at least understand this concept, but let me give you like a quick overview of short siding and how to think about it. If this is your typical green, the flag is rarely in the middle. And so the flag, let's suppose your flag today is out here, which is, you know, some number of yards from the back and then some number of yards from the right-hand side. So in general, this area here, that is your short side. And the reason it's called your short side is if you miss somewhere around here, right? Those are great X's. If you miss somewhere around here, you're gonna have probably like a sketchier shot. Now the shortest side is actually this area right here. You're starting to get a little bit more space to play with. But in general, if you're missing on this side of the green over here, and often greens roll back to front, so the slope of the green might be down this way or it might be down this way. And so let's suppose you're hitting from here and you're hitting downhill chips. It's gonna be really hard to hit a really dainty little chip that gets the ball to stop before it gets to the hole. So really simple concept is, this is your short side out here, the right-hand side, and this is your fat side, right? Not your fat, you get where I'm coming from. This is the fat side of the green. And so it's kind of ironic as I stand here with my back to the camera. Anyway, so what's interesting and important from a scratch perspective is this area is where you want to be aiming. Now, obviously you don't want to be aiming out here unless there's like water over here and so there's a lot of trouble and so you're trying to play it safe. So what you want to do is you add in your shot dispersion to wherever shot you're hitting. So let's suppose you're hitting a wedge. If you're hitting a wedge, you probably have a little bit more. Let's use pink again. If you're hitting a wedge, you probably have a little bit tighter shot dispersion. So maybe you want to aim your wedge like here, right? Versus if you're coming at this from like a 3-wood, you might want to still actually be over here, right? On the safe side. So in case you miss, you're still not ending up in the water. And so net, what it comes down to is don't be short-sighted. And this fits in nicely with our previous option, which was hit really simple shots. You want to be hitting simple shots, and the way you do that is by having a nice, easy running chip from say over here, which you can bounce, roll up, nice and easy, versus having to try to hit like a 3-yard flop shot because you hit over the green and now you got to land the ball perfectly on the fringe and hopefully it rolls and hits the flag on the way down. Otherwise it's going to stop at the bottom of the green. So simple question to ask yourself is, obviously question 1 is, what is the short side here? And the second question is, where do I want to aim so my shot dispersion avoids that short side? This very, very simple. I think if there's one major thing you should get out of this entire conversation, this is a really big one. If you can just choose to not be short-sighted as much as possible, and yes, it's generally a choice, I'd say 80-90% of the time it's a choice, this will automatically reduce your score significantly. And here we are at number 3, which is all about hitting partial shots. So this is something that scratch golfers, all scratch golfers I played, are very good at, and a lot of mid-handicappers aren't. I'm really surprised that they generally tend to hit mostly stock shots, and then they're like, oh, I was in between clubs. Yeah, you're pretty much always gonna be in between clubs. It's gonna happen. So instead, we wanna learn how to hit partial shots so that you can hit your 8-iron 140 instead of the full stock 150, because leaning on your 9-iron, trying to get it to go an extra 5 or 10 yards is usually a recipe for disaster. So there's 2 things that are gonna cause you to hit or cause you to need to hit partial shots. One is obviously distance. The second is wind. So if there's a lot of wind blowing, generally, they say like swing easy when it's breezy. Well, the only way you can swing easy is also if you kind of club up a little bit, because especially into a headwind, you don't want to put a lot of spin on the ball. So partial shots, very, very important. So let's talk about 4 ways that you can really simply do partial shots and get like better ideas of yardages without having to practice all the time, right? So the first one is really simple, is just choke down on the club. Right, so choking down on the club, I think for every inch you choke down, you drop about 5 to 6 yards of distance. Now it varies from person to person, it varies from club to club, but it's an easy way to test this out. So you could just try grabbing a club next time you're at the course, right, and you're trying to hit a shot. Instead of gripping it from the back like you normally do, just try to choke down an inch and then see with a perfect full swing how much distance you get. You'll probably get a little bit less. Actually, here's also a caveat. There's an off chance that your clubs are too long for you and you're actually gonna hit the ball better. And in that case, you're welcome. You're welcome for me pointing that out for you. So choking down an inch will get you roughly 5 yards less distance. All the other caveats apply, right? Something definitely to test out. Another way to do it is by hitting the ball higher. And so, or lower, right? The lower is a little bit sketchy because when you hit the ball lower, it's gonna come out a little bit hotter, so it may not land. It's gonna land a little bit shorter for sure, but it's also gonna take off a little bit. So lower is a little bit sketchy on that. But higher, you can definitely take down some distance, because when you hit the ball higher, more of the energy goes up versus going out that way, right? Obviously wind, all this stuff apply, but something to think about. And so this is something to experiment with. I don't have like a good answer for you exactly on how much you'll gain, but the way I like to think about it is, if I hit the ball higher, I'm probably gonna like drop about 5 yards, maybe 7 yards, right? From my total overall distance, just because that's the way I kind of feel when I'm like hitting it high. The reason I can't give you a good number is because I don't know what high means to you versus what it means to me. And I don't have all those. We talked about Kid had GC quad TrackMan, I had my eyes. And so I can't measure exactly what these numbers are with all the ball flight stuff and all that yet. Sponsorships, keep them coming. So the third way is to obviously just have a shorter swing, which is something that I use all the time for my wedges. If you've been using like the clock method, it's basically that, I know this wedge goes this far versus if I'm here, it goes this far. You can do it with wedges. You can also do it with your longer irons if you want. For me, I don't really try it that much. I don't practice enough to be able to like know that accurately, so I prefer the choke down or the higher methods. But you can definitely do this for a shorter swing, especially if you want the ball to come out low and hot. And shorter swing for me, that's kind of the way that it works. So this is something you'll have to experiment with, but really simple, especially for the wedges. That's an important one. Another way to do it, which is kind of the pro way, is actually your shot shape. Now, I will say for most of us, if you're watching this video, then being able to hit a cut to take some of the distance off your shot is probably on the harder side of what we're able to do. So even for me, like there's sometimes when I'm hitting a cut, it's not often, it's rare. But just sometimes when I'm hitting a cut on purpose, I know it will take off like 5 to 10 yards. That's kind of the way I think about it. Notice how precise that is, 5 to 10 yards. I'll make sure that if it's like -10, I'm not in trouble. But I'll also make sure that if it's -5, I'm not in trouble, right? So I'm like looking for that range. In general, I don't recommend using shot shape as like your main way to do it. I would do these first. I would do this only as kind of either A, a last resort, or B, if you're gonna hit that kind of shot anyway. And then you understand that, yeah, there's a partial piece to it. Or maybe you're really good at this and this is something you wanna do and something you wanna master. Well, power to you, you should go do that for sure. And so from a putting it into play perspective, the question I would ask, and I suggest we all ask, is what adjustments do I want to make to hit the partial yardage? Again, I'll just repeat it again because I think it's so important. For me, the simplest answer is just choke down on the club. Choke down the club, unless it's a wedge and something you know about, you've used the clock system before, hit that like shorter shot. But generally, an easy choke down, potentially trying to hit a little bit higher, those will work really well for you. The partial swing, obviously, also for a lot of people works really well. So definitely try that out if you haven't tried it already. It's a good catch. But this is a simple question. This will help you put it in play easily tomorrow. And here we are at number 2. Before we get into it, I just want to call something out here. I know all of this can feel like a lot. Don't stress. It's all going to get like filed away in your brain into like good spot, and it will come out when you need it. You don't have to like actively take a lot of time to remember it because now it's part of your IQ. So you're good to go. So don't stress. We're going to talk about 2 more really, really important things. And then you're gonna be able to put them into play next time when you're on the course, because you're gonna know, oh, wait a second, I don't wanna be short-sighted. What do I do about that? Or hey, this feels like a partial shot, so I'm just gonna like choke down a little bit on this club and hit that partial shot. Trust yourself, trust your psyche and your heart to like remember to pull out the right things at the right time. All right, with that, number two. And number two is all about how scratch golfers spend way more time behind the ball versus over it. And for folks who are more kind of like the mid-higher handicaps, there's a lot more time spent over the ball trying to go through that mental checklist of what needs to happen, right? So the big difference here is that scratch golfers and really good golfers, there's a couple core things that matter to them. So one is conditions. Basically, like, what kind of conditions are we at? What does the lie look like? Are there trees in the way? Am I trying to land this ball right next to this giant pond? So things like that, right? So the conditions are really important. What's a wind like? Another core part of conditions. So that is a very important piece. The second thing that's really important to scratch golfers is the target. Where am I trying to land this ball? Where am I going to roll? Where's it going to land? Where's it going to roll? Where does it need to stop? That kind of stuff, right? What am I trying to avoid? So having a good idea of what that target is. We just talked about short sighting. That brings in the target. We also talked about green contours. That also applies to the target. So very important there. And the third thing is, what kind of swing do I need to put on this club or on this, basically on this ball, to get to where, taking the conditions into account, to get the ball to my target. So these are the three things that scratch golfers, really good golfers, are thinking about. Everybody should be thinking about in terms of how to get the ball to where you want it to go. But the thing is, most of us, especially when we're first learning, we try to solve for these things while we're standing over the ball. And that is not a good place to be doing most of this thinking. So one other thing you'll notice is that really good golfers also tend to play fairly quickly. And it's not that they're thinking about less stuff, it's just that they're thinking about it more efficiently and at times when they're not standing over the ball. And also, same thing you'll see when you watch the PGA Tour. The pros spend a lot more time with their caddy standing behind the ball, figuring out what's going on. And so a good way to think about this is basically, we call it the think box, feel box, play box. And I have a video, I'll link it up here on what you can do. So the think box is where all of this stuff happens, right? Generally, the feel box is where you do a quick practice swing, right, to get a feel for what's happening. And then the play box is where you actually go and hit the ball. And you don't want to be standing in this place for very long at all. So two parts that are really important here. The first is spend some time behind the ball. You can also do this when you're walking up. So you have an idea, like ball's in the fairway, you can see it from far away. So you know you're probably gonna have like a reasonable lie. If it's different when you get there, you make adjustments. But you can figure this out from behind the ball, like farther away. Really spend time in that think box. And the outcome that you want from that think box is effectively the answers to these three questions. The first is, what's my target? Which is very, very important. So before you step up to the ball, you should have a good idea of what your target is. The second is, what club do I want to hit to get to this target and get the ball to land and roll and all this other stuff that we just talked about. That's very important. And the third is, what kind of swing am I going to put on the ball to get it to where I want it to go? So these are the three questions that you want to make sure you answer as you're standing behind the ball versus over the ball. In general, I'll say one last thing here. In general, the mental checklist is not a good way to play golf. It will overload your mind, and the best golf you will ever play is when you have the clearest mind, period. It's just how it is. So mental checklists, save them for the range, try working on one thing at a time, and you'll find that you do a lot better with less things in your mind. All of these generally want to be decided before you get out of the think box. You then use that swing in the feel box, and then you hit the ball, celebrate in the play box. And here we are at number one. I'm glad you're still here because this is the most important one of them all. Getting this one right actually basically makes all the decisions for everything else that we've talked about. And this one is having a clear priority for the day. Now, there's two things that basically you can play for when you're on the golf course. And this is the way I like to put it. I'm sure there's more, but the two that I like to think of are either play for score or I play for glory. And so glory is, I hit a 385-yard drive, and so I feel like the man. The fact that it went 50 yards right, doesn't matter. It was just really far. Score is, yes, sometimes I laid up, sometimes I hit a 3-wood when I really wanted to hit a driver, but at the end of the day, I ended up shooting a really good score, and that made me happy, and that eventually will translate into my handicap, which will help my ego, and my ego is the most important thing to me. Most of us, really. But the handicap will get better, and I will feel a sense of accomplishment, et cetera, et cetera. Some days, I'm going to feel a sense of accomplishment just from that glory, right? Some days, I'm going to make, 7 birdies. And actually, one of my first really low rounds was I shot even par. I made 7 birdies, and I had 2 doubles and 3 bogeys. And, it was even par. So it was a glory day, right? I'm going for the short. Doesn't matter about short siding. Short siding, actually, you end up being short sided when you're going for the glory, because the odds are is you could actually also end up on the other side and make a birdie, but then you might also have like a really sketchy 5-yard downhill chip. But deciding what your priority is for the day before you get going, or you can even decide it on, the first or second hole. So for example, for me, I tend to look at like, what's my physical, mental, and emotional state? There are days when I'm physically not in great shape because I didn't sleep enough, or I, did something too much the night before, or whatever. There's some days when I might not be in a great like mental state, just my mind's really tired, or I have a lot of things going on. And so those days, I just want to have a good time. Sometimes I'm just playing with my friends and I want to just have a really good time with them because my emotional state wants to be like fill up my tank by playing with my friends. So those days I don't need to grind to try to get a low score. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the value of understanding this before the round is effectively makes the decisions for you. When you're playing for glory, you don't have to think about being short-sighted. When you're playing for glory, you don't have to think about like, I'm not gonna try like the cut method to try to like take distance off. But if you really wanna get your handicap down, if you really wanna start shooting good scores and start thinking like a scratch golfer, having your priorities solved before you play the round ideally, or maybe on the first hole, will dictate the rest of that round for you and will help you get all those numbers in the direction you really want them to go. The key point is, don't beat yourself up for score if you're playing for glory. And vice versa. If you're playing for score and you're not about playing boring golf, it's because you chose it that way, right? So just something to keep in mind. It'll change everything else that you go about. So you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out what the question is for this point right here, which is around the priorities. Effectively, am I playing for score today or am I playing for glory today? Between those two, remember, just have a good time. I call this game hit ball with stick, and I really enjoy hitting ball with stick. So enjoy the game. Obviously, that's the number one most important thing. But sometimes making good scores helps you enjoy it more. And this, altogether, these 7 things that we just talked about are gonna help you build more consistency. And if you really wanna build consistency, I actually put a whole video together for it. I've linked it right here. You should definitely watch that one next to figure out the other elements that bring in that consistency and help you increase your golf IQ even further. So thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave me a comment to let me know what you thought. If you have more ideas, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on like scratch golfer IQ tips. I'd love to find out more. Otherwise, see you again soon. All right, bye.